Very warm welcome to our club tonight. I'm getting going before our panelists are up there because there's a few announcements to get through, so I'll get these things going before we actually bring them up and introduce them to you for tonight's very topical discussion. These are just things that are coming up at the club in the next 2 weeks or so. Next Monday, we have the latest in our documentary film night series. It's a film called I Am Not Your Negro. That is a famous phrase by the famous black writer James Baldwin. Again, a look at the now very explosive topic of race and identity in the United States. On the 29th of November, Wednesday, Benjamin Zawacki, a long-standing member of the club, he spent the last 3 or 4 years writing a book on the United States' role in this region and its relations in particular with Thailand, one of its oldest allies. He really knows the subject inside out. It's well worth coming for it. The book should be fantastic, but nobody else can give you better insights into how the relationship between Thailand in particular and the United States has changed. If you look on our walls, we're putting up the latest of our photo exhibits. The club tries to showcase the works of the region's best photographers, particularly news photographers, every month or so. We'll be launching the photo exhibit of a collection of photographs by Filipino photographers who chronicled the drug wars in the Philippines. A lot of these photographers have suffered quite strong criticism and social media harassment for the work they've done. It's a very polarizing issue in the Philippines. We're delighted to be able to showcase their work and have some of them here on the 1st of December, that's a Friday, to talk about the work they've done. And on the 6th of December, the ultimate whodunit, who killed Jim Thompson? A figure, I think we've had many programs like this before, but it's a whole new theory now, a very, very controversial one, which will be explored here at the club. And on the 15th of December, those of you around, we will have the FCC annual Christmas party. Do come along, it's always a big knees up, fantastic one. I'm going to introduce tonight's panel wait for our guests to come back. We've actually got 4 people speaking tonight, one of whom is coming through from Washington, our former colleague Steve Herman. Steve is actually up on Skype now from Washington. We've woken him up very early. Steve was based in Asia for 25 years, particularly in Korea and Japan, but he was sent back for his sins. I don't know what he did in his past life to be the White House bureau chief of Voice of America. So he has been inside the White House bubble for more than a year now, and was traveling with President Trump on this last extraordinary tour of Asia. It was nice. I was able to meet Steve because I was also there for part of the trip, and it was an extraordinary trip. And we're hoping he will give us some of the insights from the trip and really the very strange dynamics that go on in the White House team now. Ajahn Kobsak, if I could ask you to come up to the panel now. We're also very, very pleased to have with us 2 of the most authoritative people on Thai foreign policy. Kobsak Chutikun, a veteran foreign ministry diplomat here in Thailand and a very familiar commentator here at the club. We've had him many times before, but with a unique wealth of experience to bring to the subject of what role the United States will now play. Ajahn Prapat Tep Chatri he's coming from Thammasat University. He heads the Department of ASEAN Studies there and also heads the Thai Association of American Studies and has a particular focus on US foreign policy. So a unique Thai look at US foreign policy. Now, a little later in the evening, not much later I hope, but we're hoping that Ajahn Thitinan Sudarak from Chulalongkorn University will come here. He's also a long-standing watcher of foreign policy, American foreign policy in this region and the dynamics of how changing Asia is shifting power in this region. I was actually at a meeting with a British minister earlier today talking about a meeting in Myanmar discussing the crisis in Rakhine State and among the Rohingyas, and he was saying to me how the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi was there. The foreign ministers from all over Asia were at this meeting, along with Aung San Suu Kyi, and he said it was visible how much Chinese power matters. Whatever anyone else wanted to say, and that all the European foreign ministers are there, the European Union is represented, the Bangladeshi foreign minister is there, but he said everyone defers to the Chinese. And when the Chinese made it clear they were supporting the government of Myanmar in its current policy, you know, that you knew that Myanmar felt confident it had all the backing it needed. The reality of Chinese power in this region has become very visible in the last year, and the new style of presenting American power, I think, by President Trump has in a way accelerated that, because in this last tour of Asia, President Trump announced an entirely new approach to US foreign policy. Asia has in many ways been anchored by American power since 1945. Everyone's kind of coalesced around that kind of guarantee of American power. And President Trump made it clear in a keynote speech in Danang in Vietnam that from now on he was interested only in two things. One was in Asian backing in dealing with North Korea, and the other was a better deal for America with each of the countries. He had no interest in multilateral agreements. And we will have to see whether, in fact, that is how things pan out. Kopsak, perhaps I could ask you, first of all, to start off this discussion with your own observations about what you think Trump's America is going to be doing in Asia.
Not very much, I hope. But if they do something, it's much more clear now after this visit that what they will be focused on. Certainly bilateral deals, transactional, personalized diplomacy, pomp and circumstance, certainly, but a certain comfort level. I think, Jonathan, that we feel that Asian leaders with Trump feel comfortable that they have somebody who they can deal with. They have a reading on him. They know how to handle him. Trump also feels comfortable, I think, with the Asian leaders, like-minded people, power criteria, strong, decisive, the only one that matters, certainly in each of their respective settings. So what does it mean for Asia? Oh, now they want me to show you, because I was not there, Jonathan, with you, or you know, with Steve, he was there, but just to represent those who were not there, those who followed it on TV, on newspapers and all that, some of the photo opportunities, the pictures of the trip. I think President Trump on last Wednesday made a report on his holiday, not holiday, but his official trip, but he didn't bring out the photos, the family photos. So I picked out some from over the net. So we see, let's see, what was the first one? The Emperor. Okay. Straight arm, outstretched. Fine. Emperor saying, "Oh wow, you are tall. You are, you know, you are really tall. You know, we look up to you, as we always have." And certainly, the next one would be, the trip. They're not going to do an Obama. Certainly, anything that Obama did, we don't do. He did a 90-degree bow. No way, not America, not the great America this time, no. Straight. You bow. Okay, this is the great America, the new America.
Trump is towers over people. Yeah.
You can imagine when he shook hands. But okay, fine. This was a bit over the top. This was also in his first year. Yeah. The first Pacific American president, he said. I'm the first Pacific American president. It went down a little bit after that. But Trump didn't say he was anything rather than American. But I think in many ways, he was a very Asian American president, in many ways. But anyway, so, and certainly we won't do this. We're not going to fall down and vomit over everybody as George Bush did.
President Bush being vomiting,
yes. Just before his election, 1992, I think. He had just invaded Iraq, won the war, went on a sort of tour, you know, a congratulatory tour around. This was almost the New Year.
That's actually Barbara Bush behind him, isn't it?
Yes, like saying, hey, look what happened, you know.
She looks like she's smothering him.
She might want it to, yeah. But no, so optically, that was even at the height of American power. They had just thrashed Iraq, Saddam Hussein and all that. And he was on this congratulatory tour, certain to be re-elected according to the polls in 1992. But that optically, you know, maybe he stayed on too long. That's why Trump said, 12 days, that's it, I go home. I don't stay longer. That was the longest tour of an American president to Asia, and that happened. Trump was lucky, you know. What happened optically? It was Abe falling into the bunker, you know. When they were playing golf, on the left is Abe falling down into the bunker, and Trump walking away. I don't care. He can get himself out of the bunker. So he walks away, and look at him. See, I got one over you. So that's optically for us. Now to South Korea, he went. Is he coming? Where is he? What's up there? Is he or is he not coming to the DMZ? Well, apparently because of the weather, he couldn't make it. And he wanted to go. And you can imagine if he had gone to the DMZ and pointed and looked into North Korea, what he would have seen was this. The rocket man waiting for him. No, then he's not coming. No, is he coming? No, he's not coming. Okay, so, wow, you know, he told his friends to cut relations with us. Hasn't happened. He told the Thais maybe to close the North Korean restaurant on Sukhumvit. It hasn't happened. Maybe they like Korean kimchi, all these countries. Well, fine, you know, those are American allies. But if China then sent us a special envoy to tell us to calm down, not to rock the boat, and to behave properly, well, I don't care, because if China is not there, the Soviet or Russia is ready to come in to play a role, as they did in Syria, to be a presence in the Middle East. Now maybe Northeast Asia is open. So I have options, apparently. Kim Jong-un was saying, I heard from somebody who was not there. So I could make it up and nobody can contradict me, but you can double check that story. Then on to China. Wow, the first American president to be feted in the Forbidden City for dinner. Never happened before, not to Nixon, to anybody else, certainly not for Obama. But he was saying, perhaps, wow, you guys are still wearing overcoats. You don't have heating here? Well, look, this, you know, you need a high rise, you need a tower here maybe in Beijing. So that was the optics, very strong physically for his age, very strong all the time, showing that America is back, America is strong, America does not fumble, America is somebody to be bargained with. But surprisingly, given his love for walls, he skipped the visit to the Great Wall and left it to Melania to go instead. So she went while he went off to Danang for APEC. She did not join, presumably, maybe because she went to Japan, Korea, China, bilaterals. APEC, Vietnam, ASEAN, Philippines, multilateral. So there you go. Which is more important in his eyes, America's eyes? Is it the bilateral visit or is it the multilateral engagement? But anyway, Melania did an excellent job there in China, wowed everybody. And of course, the biggest export item of China next year, end of next year, to the United States would be a car. So China, as you say, China now produces automobiles more than United States and Japan combined. and they will be exporting to the United States end of next year a car by the name of Trumpchi. Trumpchi, a Trumpchi. But they said it was branded 6-7 years ago, before Trump. And now the word in Beijing is that maybe we have to change the name. Trumpchi may not sell well apart from West Virginia. So maybe they're looking for a new name for that car, the big export item, the next big wave coming from China. Automobiles hitting, this is the iconic manufacturing industry of the West, of the industrialized countries. But China now produces more than USA and Japan combined, and will be exporting cars to the United States beginning of next year, starting with the Trumpchi. Trumpchi is a very good car. They got the guy who ran the Lexus brand for Toyota to do that Trumpchi car, right, to be exported next year. Fine, okay. So, on to Danang. Vladimir, why are we wearing Viet Cong uniforms? I thought we blasted those guys out of the water during the war. No, are they still around? Yeah. I don't know, you weren't in it. And also, Vladimir, who's that girl behind you? Who's that woman standing behind you? That's maybe the richest woman in Asia. She controls about $200 billion investment fund. That's the wife of the Chinese, no, not the Chinese, Singaporean Prime Minister, who the Chinese say is not Chinese. They refuse to accept Singaporeans as Chinese, and the Singaporeans said, we are not Chinese. So there's a little wrinkle in the new wave, the imperial wave of China coming into this region. You know the guy this on the left? Malcolm Turnbull, Australian, Aussie. He wants to be in the picture. He said, okay, US, China, and you guys getting along? Me, Australia, down there, down under. Don't forget me. Let me take a selfie with you, because we can't really choose. Like all the Asians, Southeast Asians in particular, we want to be friends with America, but nobody wants to be an enemy of China. So we hope you guys get along, but not too well, because if you two get along, I don't know what it means for the other countries, how they would position themselves. So that's another element. It's not just whether to choose between China and US and what role they have, or who will be dominant, who will rule, who will have influence. But the other possibility, of course, is that a bromance between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, if those two get together, what it means for the other smaller countries in this region, including Australia. So the answer came from 11 countries who said TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, initiated by the Obama administration. No, we go ahead, 11, without the United States around the table. They left the seat for the US, but I still can't find it in this picture of the TPP going ahead without the United States. So again, they were trying to coalesce, get together, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Singapore, to say that, no, the future is not only a choice between the US and China, but the smaller middle countries can get together also to find a way through by emphasizing economic cooperation and prosperity. And the first time ever it has occurred in Manila, the Quad. We've never heard of this Quad, Q-U-A-D, meaning four, but the first ever meeting of the Quad at official level officially took place in Manila. The Quad being US, Japan, Australia, and India. We heard a lot, of course, about Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific, that was the iteration that perhaps the White House, the staff around President Trump said, you have to say this every time. So every speech, every public utterance, every press conference, he would say Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific. So he went to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting, APEC, and said, I'm glad to be here at the Indo-Pacific conference. So Indo-Pacific is the new buzzword, the new keyword, and it was made, by iteration at every stop, at every speech, to say this is the new strategic thinking of the US. So it's Indo-Pacific, bringing India, the 4 countries, the so-called alliance of democracies, India, Australia, United States, Japan. They had, it's been in the works for some time. They had the 4 of them had a naval exercise some 6-7 years ago in Malabar, I think, in the Indian Ocean off coast of Bengal, of Bangladesh. And the Chinese made a demarche to all the 4 governments, saying, oh, you had a naval exercise with the Indians in Indian Ocean? Who were you fighting? Who was your enemy? They asked of all these 4 countries. Meaning, was it us? Were you getting together to fight us, a threat from us? Did you perceive a threat from us? After which the Australians sometimes participated, sometimes not. Indians sometimes went out of this grouping. But in Manila, with the urging of the United States, the 4 countries, the Quad, got together for the first time. And in future, they said there will be more official meetings, maybe even at summit level. So that's a new grouping that perhaps we should keep our eyes on. A grouping that, of course, bypasses the whole of ASEAN. The whole of ASEAN. Thailand in 2019 will chair ASEAN. So end of 2019, please stick around. Mr. Trump will be in town, most likely, November, December. And certainly, I think he'll be, next year, Singapore will be chair of ASEAN, and then Papua New Guinea will chair APEC. So most likely the same thing will happen. They'll come, hop to APEC, then on to ASEAN in the same region. For Thailand in 2019, in November, we will chair this meeting, this ASEAN Summit, East Asia Forum, and everything, expecting all the leaders to come. The big question is now, would President Trump come? Because the APEC summit will be in Chile, not in the same region, opposite parts of the world. A choice has to be made which one to go to. If he does come to Bangkok end of 2019, it will be a big thing. He says that, look, I choose ASEAN, East Asia Forum, I choose Indo-Pacific over what had been a Clinton initiative of APEC, which was purely economic, multilateral economic. If they say no more, APEC doesn't matter, WTO doesn't matter, that would be a new signal of where the priorities of the United States are. So hang around, see whether President Trump will come here, whether we'll give him the welcome that he deserves, a red carpet all the way from, Suvarnabhumi to the hotel. And apparently he likes elephants, so that's a positive, So he banned elephant hunting and all that from Kenya and all that. So maybe an elephant procession for President Trump, from airport to the hotel would be appreciated. They had last week, I think, a trial run for that. They closed this run Basong place to do a tourism thing, parade. So who knows? So that's something to look forward to. I think what we would be looking at, what is the role of this Quad now, these 4 countries, alliance of democracies, that has met for the first time in Manila at an ASEAN meeting. You can imagine, the boldness there, what the ASEANs would think. Oh, those guys are meeting in the corridors by themselves, the 4 countries, a new grouping. Duterte, hey, move a little bit to the left, get away from the right, come to the left. Oh, wow, well, where are your hands, show your hands. And so, yeah. So, well, no, but he tried, and I think he impressed all his hosts. and they felt a little comfort now that, well, he's not, has he been portrayed maybe by Jonathan or by Dominic in the press, he's much nicer, as General Prayut came back and said, oh, he's a nice guy, he's very friendly, he didn't mention anything bad.
I don't think he mentioned human rights for the entire trip.
No, none of that, no Rohingya, no, who are they, and the only thing is that that's the US delegation. If you notice there, I'm sure they're not going to shop at Benetton. This is going back to the 1950s. This is the power. This is the US. These are the people, the princes of the universe, coming. For the first time, I think, a trip to Asia with no Asian American, with no, so inclusiveness, diversity was not something they wanted to display, even optically, to the Asians. This is who we are. This is who
I don't think there's a single Asian expert there apart from Matt Pottinger.
Yeah. I don't know whether they're expert, but the optics, of this is the delegation that took the picture. This is in Manila, Malacanang office. So a complete difference from the Obama the entourage that came on the plane, certainly. And then lastly, lining up, waiting with their spouses to go into the formal dinner. Trump must have thought, who is this guy on my left here? Where did he come from? Where's Melania? This guy, no, I'm okay. So, he left his spouse way behind to fill in for Melania. I don't know. So, this is the last optic for us in Thailand to say, okay, everything's fine. They get along, they're buddies, even though maybe strange bedfellows or whatever. But again, all the autocrats and everything. So that was it. But with all that, with all the optics and everything, no, I don't know how to turn this off now. Okay. So with all that, to a little on the serious side a little bit, you asked what is the impression of Thailand, maybe of Thai people of this region. I would have to go back to, you are in Thailand, you maybe sense even after the cremation, a continuing sense of concern, of worry, a sense of emptiness even. Looking at the future, looking at the present, what we have lost, what we may be gaining, the change, the transition, the void. I have a 4.5-year-old niece, goes to kindergarten school. She lives with me every day. She goes to school, her parents take her to school. One day, after half an hour, she ran back and to the apartment because she got used over the past year, portrait of King Bhumibol in the lobby of the condominium, on the way to school, big portraits everywhere, buildings, state agencies, black ribbons all around. In school, big portrait of King Bhumibol at the entrance of the school. She bows down to. Half an hour she ran back and said, I forgot something. I feel not safe. I feel, I need, where is my necklace? Where the necklace with this little Buddha thing that sometimes they put for the small children to wear around their necks. So the parents said, no, you have it around you. But she said, no, I feel empty. I feel unsafe. Even with that Buddha. So that was that sense that something's not right. Nobody has her back or something. So in that context, I was going back to, let's look at Obama again. Let's look at what the US was even though, you know, we were a little disappointed. Let's look at what was that nation that was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal and that they all have the right to certain inalienable rights of every man. Where is that nation? In 2009, the first year of Obama's administration also, he went to Japan. And he said this, he said, you know, in Japan, in Tokyo, he said that America comes with a belief in the democratic right of free people to choose their own leaders and to realize their own dreams. So we look back at the Nobel Peace Prize. In his first year or so in Norway, he was given the Nobel Peace Prize, not for having done anything yet, because he was first year, but for the possibility of him being able to do good. They already gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said, America will always be a voice for the human aspirations that are universal, the right of citizens to speak freely or worship as they please, to choose their own leaders or assemble without fear. If we lose these ideals, we lose what's best about humanity. We lose our sense of possibility. We lose our moral compass. Ideals, maybe words, aspirations, hope, yes, okay, not totally fulfilled, but it was there. Do we miss part of that also now? Do we have a sense of emptiness that, okay, there's something missing? The I in ideals have been dropped, the letter I. We are left with deals. Make a deal, the art of the deal, transactions, bottom line, okay. What is that other element of it that can inspire hope, ordinary people, not the leaders getting together, comfy, pomp, circumstance, and all that. So maybe that is the void, the sense of emptiness there, politically, strategically, socially, but in the sense of ideals. Who has our back? Who is standing for those things? What does the future hold without that dimension to human life, to human living? Nobody is standing there. People are saying, oh, that's the past. The moral arc of the universe that Obama talked about that bends towards justice, maybe is no longer there. That arc bends now just to the bottom line. Is it that the new world that we are faced with? When China, Xi Jinping stands up and says, I am for free trade, liberal order, rules of the game, openness, inclusiveness. Who is that speaking? Do we then say, okay, I'm with China because China stands for American ideals? Is that the new world that we are faced with? Is that the choice? So I think it hasn't come to that yet. The choice hasn't been made. But this trip of President Obama, the consequences, I think, Jonathan, at least for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other Thais, is that it has raised this question, it has raised this sense of perhaps emptiness, that who do we really, the ordinary people, have in this region at our back, looking for us, looking out for us, with certain alternative ideals, not the deals that are made by the top 1% of each country with the other 1% of the other country, but something more aspirational for the future, for succeeding generations, for the younger kids coming up who have not really thought about it, don't know all the politics of it, but have that sense that there is something missing, a void. And I hope...
I'm just going to see if I can bring in Steve Herman here. It's going to be a bit of a change of tone because Steve was on the trip with President Trump. he can probably give us a much more hands-on sense of what it was like watching Trump's Asia policy unfolding, and also what the kind of impression was of the Trump team itself. Tam, can you bring up Steve Herman, please? Steve, if you can hear us all right, we can see you up on the screen now. Could you just run through your own impressions of the tour? Was it a success on its own terms? What do you think?
Sure. Are you able to hear me okay? Because the
You're
audio
great. We can hear you very well
at the beginning, but it's sort of degraded into a lot of hum, so I want to make sure you can hear me okay.
You're great. We can hear you very well.
Great. Okay. Well, this was a very ambitious trip. I was fortunate or unfortunate to be on the entire thing. I did a number of legs on Air Force One as the radio pool reporter. So I was in the room for a lot of the things you were showing the photographs of, and the body language, I would agree, is extremely important. But I do think that the bar was set pretty low for this trip. There were no great expectations that had been put forward by the White House. We did not get any major policy announcements. There were, as noted, some very interesting things happened, like the meeting of the Quad, and human rights, of course, really wasn't mentioned, a very significant difference from past administrations. And as far as I can tell, if we want to compare 71-year-old Donald Trump to what you saw with George H.W. Bush during that disastrous dinner in Tokyo, Trump seemed to physically hold up quite well and seemed quite energized. There was that hitch at the very end where things were running behind in Manila, and all of a sudden we were told that the president would not be attending that plenary session of the East Asia Summit, which is why that extra day had been added on in Manila in the first place. Now, that may have been due to aircraft scheduling at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, where they had certain times for all these VIP aircraft to take off, but you would have thought that perhaps they could have found some way for the president to have stayed on, because he only ended up taking off about 30 minutes early, if I recall, by skipping that event. So there was a bit of head scratching there. One thing I would note, the Korea leg of the trip was absolutely fascinating, and there was that last minute hitch with the president getting to the DMZ. We were told it was because of weather, but there were some rumblings that there could have been a security issue behind all that. But that speech that he gave, I was in the room there at the National Assembly when he gave that speech in Seoul. I actually think that was probably the best crafted speech of the Trump administration. And I know some of the people that were involved in putting it together. It had something for everyone in South Korea, as well as a very strong signal, obviously, to North Korea without going over the top with little Rocket Man insults and that sort of thing. And there's a new poll out in South Korea that shows that Trump's popularity has gone up there. And in fact, he's now more popular in South Korea than Xi Jinping. And when we're talking about the whole, the U.S. perceived pivot away from Asia and the rise of China in the region, that is something I think is highly significant. So for me, it was, I have to say, it was the most excruciating foreign trip I've ever done as a journalist. But, that's what we sign up for. And they perhaps tried to cram a little bit too much. But the takeaway is there were no disasters at any stop, and that they did achieve something at each location. And we saw that at each country, each leader was trying to outdo the other as far as impressing Donald Trump. And he, from what we can tell, what he told us directly and what we heard from his staff, he loved the pageantry, and each stop, whether it was Korea, there was all sorts of ceremonial things. They called it a state plus visit in China. So they did definitely cater to his ego. And that's the sort of thing that works with this president. Now, as far as the long-term ramifications, I think there were two things that came out of it that Trump signaled very, very closely, and that we also learned from off-the-record talks with administration officials, that there are two takeaways from this. One is there is going to be a very tough line on trade with China. There's going to be significant actions taken despite the relationship that has developed personally between Xi and Trump. And the other thing is that they have, even though they won't state this explicitly, talking about red lines and lines in the sand and all that, that is definitely there with North Korea. And I think there is a much more significant chance of a conflict, military conflict with the North, especially if Pyongyang engages in some sort of atmospheric nuclear test over the Pacific, or demonstrates that it does have a nuclear tipped missile on top of an intercontinental, a nuclear bomb on top of an ICBM, that there will be kinetic responses from the United States. And so that was my sort of takeaway. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about it. To me, I'm still a bit jet lagged from the whole thing, and I wish I was there with you in Bangkok tonight, because I'm much more still, my body is still on Asia time than America time right now. But it was definitely a very ambitious trip, and we didn't have any major disasters. And with this administration, I think you can mark that down as an accomplishment.
Thanks very much, Steve. Just stay with us for a moment. I'm just going to bring in some of our other panelists. Thank you very much. We've got Ajahn Titinampong Sudarak here as well. Thank you for coming. I know you had other family commitments. Ajahn, perhaps you could give us your own take on your impressions of where America's role now sits in this region after the Trump visit.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank FCCT for inviting me here. But before I start, let me ask you how much time do you have?
Keep it brief, but you've certainly got 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe.
Okay, about 50 minutes.
I'll let you know when your time's up.
Around 8, 10, okay. Okay, my presentation going to be focusing on Trump Asian trip, but I will divide my analysis into several sections. First, the context, and then the second on the 1 year of Trump administration. The third section going to be Trump Asian visit. What are the highlights? And then my last part going to be the implications, particularly for Asia, for ASEAN, and for Thailand. Okay, let's start with the context. Okay, the context that is determining Trump policy toward Asia, I think there are 3 important rises. First of all, the rise of Asia. The second one, the rise of China. And the third one is the rise of ASEAN. I think these are the 3 important rises that have the effect on Trump policy toward Asia. He has to set up, he has to formulate the policy to deal with the rise of Asia, to deal with the rise of China, and also to deal with the rise of ASEAN. Okay, that is the external context. About the internal context is the Trump idea, Trump's ideology. I think maybe you already have known that his idea, his basic idea is this, that the US is in decline. And the reasons are because of the globalization, because of the free trade area, because of the relocation of production bases outside the US, the illegal forces, illegal workers, and the last one going to be other countries are taking advantage of the U.S. These are the three basic reasons that Trump believes that caused the American decline. So his policy is to deal with this in the sense that he's going to be anti-globalization, anti-FTA, anti-foreign workers, anti-relocation of American industries abroad, and pushing allies and partners not to taking advantage of the U.S. anymore. Okay, that is his basic idea. Okay, 1 year has already passed, and we thought that it's going to be a very difficult, going to be a very turbulent period for the world if he fully implement his idea. But when he has already passed, and we see that he has becoming more and more practical, more and more mainstream in his policy. He has, tried to reach out and maintaining alliance, and then trying to continue U.S. theme policy toward Asia, that is to play a role, and also to contain China. That is also the continuity of American policy toward Asia. This is to hedge against China. Okay. On trade, he has already withdrawn the U.S. from the TPP. But we don't know yet, before he came to Asia this time, what going to be his trade policy. He didn't elaborate yet until now, until Danang. Okay. And another thing that is also very important, that we already know that China is proactive right now, particularly concerning about infrastructure project, the grand strategic design of One Belt, One Road initiative, the setting up of the AIIB, etc. Okay, how Trump could be able to deal with these Chinese proactive policy toward Asia, particularly concerning about infrastructure project. Okay, so now let's move to my third part. That is, what is the highlight? What are the highlights of Trump Asian trip this time? I don't want to focus on security issues. Of course, going to be North Korea, but I think the real highlights, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we don't know yet what is Trump trade policy toward Asia is until Danang. Okay, at Danang, President Trump made a speech at the APEC CEO summit, and it's very interesting. I think this is the first time that he elaborated his trade policy toward Asia, the first time. No. And okay, I would like to quote what he said. No, okay, he said that I'm here to offer a renewed partnership with America to work together to strengthen the bonds of friendship, and at the core of this partnership, we seek robust trade relationship rooted in the principle of fairness and reciprocity. When the U.S. enters into a trading relationship with other countries or other, from now on, expect that our partners will faithfully follow the rules just like we do. We expect that markets will be open to an equal degree on both sides, and that private industry, not government planners, will direct investment. This is what he said. Unfortunately, for too long and in too many places, the opposite has happened. For many years, the U.S. open our economy with few conditions, we lower tariffs, reduce trade barriers, allow foreign goods. While we lower market barriers, other countries didn't open their market to us. The US, I don't want to go too long. Okay, he mentioned that other countries in Asia, in particular, engage in product dumping, subsidized goods, currency manipulation, and predatory industrial policies. They ignore the rules to gain advantage over those who follow the rules. Okay, and we can no longer tolerate these chronic trade abuses, and we will not tolerate them anymore. Okay. From this day forward, we will compete on a fair and equal basis. We are not going to let the US be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first. I will make bilateral trade agreement with Asia, Indo-Pacific nation. What we will no longer do is to enter into large agreements that tie our hands, surrender our sovereignty. Okay, these are, he prefer bilateral trade agreement rather than a multilateral one like a TPP. Okay. And okay, the last quote going to be this one, that we must ensure that all play by the rules, which they do not right now. Those who do will be our closest economic partners. Those who do not can be certain that the US will no longer turn a blind eye to violations, cheating, or economic aggression. Those days are over. Okay, these are the gist of his speech on his Asian trade policy. Okay, the implication, I'm gonna analyze the implication later on. Okay, let's move to the second one, that is on the infrastructure project. How the US gonna initiate concerning about Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative. I think that the highlight happened during his visit to Japan on the 5th and the 6th. During the joint press conference between Trump and Prime Minister Abe, both mentioned that both countries will join together to recreate a new regional economic order. And Trump also signed agreement with Japan concerning about infrastructure projects. The American Overseas Private Investment Corporation signed the agreement with Japan, and the US Trade Development and Agency signed the agreement with the Japanese METI on energy infrastructure project. Okay. I think these are the initial American move to counter the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. More to come, but I'm gonna conclude later on. Okay. Okay. Let's go to my last part. That is the implications, the assessment of the Trump Asian visit this time. I think that overall, the fact that Trump made a visit, Trump appeared on all the meeting, at the APEC meeting and ASEAN summit meeting, that is enough to ensure, to ensure Asian countries that the US will still maintain its role in the region. Okay, I think this is the good part. Okay, this is the good sign. Before that, we are afraid that maybe the US will move toward the isolationist stance, but this is no longer the place. Okay, And I think that the other overall assessment is that the US will try to contain and hedge against China. Okay, so this is the overall. How about the economic, the Trump trade policy toward Asia? My assessment, my personal assessment, I think this is the most aggressive trade policy speech. Maybe one of the most, if not the most aggressive trade policy speech by American president. Okay, I try to look back when President Reagan tried to be tough, concerning about trading partner, but not like this. Okay, after Trump, after Reagan, you have Clinton, you have Bush, you have Obama. I think none of this, have pronounced or elaborate any trade policy that is as aggressive as Trump has done. Okay, so I think this is a very important developments concerning about American move, particularly concerning about trading issue. Okay, what would be the implications for Asia, for ASEAN, and for Thailand? It has to be seen. Okay, a very important condition is that if Trump implement what he said. Okay, it happens several times in the past that he didn't implement what he said. How about this time? He made a very aggressive trading speech. Will he implement? We don't know yet. But okay, let's put it, if he would implement his trade policy toward Asian countries, what would be the options for Asian countries that we have? I think we have two options. Either negotiate, have a bilateral trade negotiation with the US. What would be the results of that? I think if you look back 10 years ago, Thailand used to negotiate Thai-US FTA, and we found out that it has been very tough. It's been very tough. So I think that if we choose this path, negotiate bilateral trade agreement with the US, it's going to be very tough. It's going to be very tough. And the US is going to be very aggressive, pushing and pushing, for trading partner, to yield to the American demands. How about if we choose another option that we do not negotiate bilateral trade agreement with the US? What would be the result? I think they are all bad options. We don't have good options. If we do not negotiate, I think that we're gonna have so-called indirect punishment by the US, either by more protectionistic measures, maybe by intellectual property rights report, maybe by sanction of some kinds, maybe by some kind of like human trafficking report, linking trade with labor standards and environmental standards. The US have a lot of measures to punish trading partners. The US has a lot. Okay, so that would be the implications concerning about the new Trump trade policy toward Asia. Okay, my last observation is going to be on infrastructure project. I think we need a balancer. We need a balancer. right now, I think we have a lopsided Chinese move. It is imbalance. It's a disequilibrium in terms of regional economic order. And in a sense, in terms of regional security order as well. But it's getting more serious concerning about economic side because Chinese move very aggressively. So we need a balancer, but I don't think we can expect any prominent, any crucial, any substantive American move in this area. I don't think that the US would getting very serious concerning about providing funding or even investment in infrastructure projects in Asia. You look at Japan. Japan has been, in recent years, been very serious about how to compete with the Chinese infrastructure project in Asia. Japan has already pronounced a new initiative and would like to use the ADB, to counterbalance the AIIB, of the Chinese bank. And if you watch the Japanese move closely, you can see that Japan has been very active trying to get involved in the infrastructure project in Southeast Asia, like the East-West Economic Corridor, or even the high-speed train from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, or the high-speed train linking 3 airports from Suvarnabhumi, Dongmueang, and Utapao, and also Dewai project as well. Of course, Japan has been very interested in investing in the EEC, the Eastern Economic Corridor in Thailand. So we can see that Japan has been getting very active. How about the US? We don't see any sign of the US move yet. Maybe the US could join hand with Japan, but we don't see any concrete projects or anything yet. Maybe the US could join hand with Japan concerning about the ADB or using World Bank, to provide funding for the Asian infrastructure project to counterbalance the Chinese move.
Ajahn Prabhat, can I just stop you there? I want to give Ajahn Titian a chance to have his say on this.
To conclude, I think that the US will still be limited in its role concerning about infrastructure project. In order to have a balancer, maybe we have to look beyond the US, to Japan, to Korea, to India, even to Australia, on this area.
Thank you very much. Ajahn Titian, your take on where America stands now from what we've seen of what was outlined on President Trump's visit, which has given us a bit more of a sense of how he views it.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and I apologize for being late. If Stephen Herman is still on the line,
he's still on the line. Yes,
I want to thank him for taking us through the trip, 12-day, bonanza of a trip. Those who follow him on social media can kind of relate to it vicariously. So thank you very much, Stephen. Look, I have a few points. So first about Trump's visit. Second, about what it means. Third, about China, China's way, China's choice. Fourth, what it means for everybody else and the aftermath. So, people saying, what the Trump trip, and by the way, I'm not a Trump basher. I follow the Trump tweets, religiously. I can kind of see how he thinks. But I do agree, I'm not a basher, Trump basher, but I agree with the Trump bashers. He's bombastic, he's obnoxious, he's rude, he's dislikable, he's despicable, deplorable, and many other adjectives you can come up with. But I've been watching to see how he actually does things, what the policies are, what the reality on the ground is. And now we can see. So the Trump trip, people are saying, was it a good trip? Was it a bad trip? Was it an okay trip? So my take on the Trump trip was an okay trip. Okay trip because it was a trip. He did show up. He did come. And it was a 12-day trip. It's been more than 2 decades. And as Steve mentioned, not since the early 1990s, president came that far for that long, and then ended up vomiting on the host. At least he didn't vomit. I mean, whatever he does, people are not gonna like him anyway. So I mean, Trump is just, he says, just the latest tweet, right? He says, the stock market is record high in the U.S. Nobody talks about that, right? Because we don't like him. He's not anti-intellectual, but he's unintellectual. He's unintellectual. He doesn't speak well. He's not articulate. He's not, our kind of speakers. However, he did make this trip. It's a long trip, 12 days. They even had a bet, learning from Steve and his colleagues, in the press pool, that he wouldn't last the trip. That if after 5 days, they'd have to turn back. Well, he made the trip. He outlasted. In fact, by the end of it, he was gloating to the journalists that actually, they were tired. They wanted to go home. He was still good. So the Trump trip did take place. He did show up. I mean, the places he went to, from Japan to China, Korea, Danang, Philippines, these are critical key countries. For Southeast Asia, of course, Vietnam and Philippines were the only 2 countries he had to go to. This is where the APEC summit was, the ASEAN-US summit, the 5th, and then of course, the East Asia summit. At first, he was going to cut short the trip, skip the East Asia summit, and then he did listen to people, so he's not completely ignorant. So he said he agreed. But then in the end, he skipped half a day, and he kind of showed up for the last day, but he skipped the plenary of the East Asia summit. So the trip was an okay trip. It's his first trip, and there'll be more of it. So I think we have to wait and see how he does it. Before he came, we kind of knew what the positions, the region kind of knew what the region was about. I mean, there's a South China Sea tensions with China's land reclamations, artificial islands, weaponization of these islands, starting from Scarborough Shoal in April 2012. Now they have actually radars. It's actually a 4 defense bases for China in the South China Sea. Along the Mekong, we have a lot of people, in Cambodia, Vietnam, upset about the dam construction. China has problems with Japan in the East China Sea, Senkaku, Diaoyu. To India, they have this, Doklam Plateau with India. So China has a ring of tensions. As we kind of know what this is about, the region. But we don't know is what the U.S. stands. Obama, there was a pivot, rebalance. We kind of knew where Obama stood, even though it didn't really follow through, it didn't really deliver. With Trump, it was showtime. So he came, and you know what? My first point, he wanted to be friends with everybody. I mean, he was like omnidirectional, I don't forget all the superlatives he used, like Xi Jinping was a very special man, and Duterte was a very successful leader, and then Putin, he didn't do anything with the election interference, and he met everybody. He wanted to be friend with everybody. So, in diplomatic lingo, you can call that kind of a omnidirectional. It's going in all directions. He wants to be friends with Abe, President Moon, Xi Jinping, Putin, everybody. Now, what the region was hoping for, the region ex-China was hoping for, was a kind of a U.S. with some remnants of the Obama administration, the Obama approach, which emphasized some mention of democracy, human rights, some values, democratic values, the kind of values that the U.S. is supposed to stand for as a bastion of, the free world, so-called, the leading democracy. But he didn't do that. It was all interest. It was 3 things, the trip: North Korea, terrorism, and salesmanship. Buy Boeing, buy our weapons, sell, reduce the deficit. So in that sense, it was disappointing as a trip to the region, right, to the region, because in Southeast Asia especially, they wouldn't say this publicly, but countries like Philippines, Vietnam, even Thailand, and you know that Trump has received at the White House Prime Minister Phuc, Prime Minister Najib, Prime Minister Prayut, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So he already received 4 ASEAN leaders in the White House. So the regional leaders, the regional states, I think, quietly or openly was hoping that, okay, he'll come in and push back a little bit, because China is all over the place, right? China has been winning. So it didn't happen. He wanted to be friends with everybody. Now, what this means is that he is true to form. You know, so far in a year's time, that's about, he says what he pledged. America first, is still America first. He is rambunctious, he's whatever, trade obsessed. You know, he tweets at night, late at night and so on. Yeah, he has many things we can criticize and deplore, but he has not gone off script from what we understood him to be, right? These are the kinds of things that he said before the election. Now, he's reversed some positions about China, you know, Xi Jinping, very successful, very special, but, you know, before he used to say China was raping the US and so on. He made some reversals, but overall, it's about America first. And I think for Trump, he's a first and foremost commerce and diplomacy for America first. America first in a different sense. I think it's a new isolationism that is finally, it's still inchoate, but it's finally shaping up. I've seen it for the last 30 years. You know, when I went to postgraduate studies in the early 1990s, late 1980s, they used to have this program. It's called AFP. All these postgrad schools will have it. America Foreign Policy. Right? You can either specialize into, I don't know, regional studies and the Soviet Union, USSR, or you can do AFP. And but there were some jokes, you know, back when Pat Buchanan was coming up, that AFP was not American foreign policy. AFP was America First program. So these were the people behind Buchanan camp all along. It just has taken them 30 years to seize the White House. So it's really literally a kind of, if you want to understand the thinking, the dynamics, the direction, the content, you go back look at the late 1980s. It goes back at least that far. So it worries me a little bit, but overall, okay, fine. You know, Trump is obsessed with trade deficits. So with, you know, the Republicans in the 1980s, there was a book I remember called Trading Places by Clyde Prestowitz. I think Trump read that book probably too many times, because that's how he thinks. Trade is a zero-sum game. So if you got a trade surplus with the US, you better watch out. You better buy more US stuff. So, but it's a kind of a positive incentive. He hasn't punished countries. He hasn't said, like, we're going to raise tariffs and we're going to introduce subsidies and, you know, prevent imports and so on, and ban imports. But he says, buy more of our stuff. And he's been selling. So if anybody goes to the White House, be ready to buy. So in a way, he's true to form in that way. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just saying that this is a script he's written and he's following through. Third, this means that if you're sitting in Beijing, the Trump trip is great. It was a good trip, right? I mean, Trump came. What did he do? Xi Jinping, very special. They got on really well. They had a red card. They know how to, the Chinese, they're nuanced. They're just deft. They know how to handle everybody. And, you know, Chinese, they always do bilateral before they do anything else. So Trump he's anti-multilateral. He's not a multilateral guy. He's not a regional guy. He's a bilateral guy and unilateral. China knows it. And China, you know, they laid out the red carpet. That's why Trump, being an entertainment guy, right, he says, oh, yeah, I got a state visit. It's like a state plus, you know, like a hotel, you know, plus, right? So China and Beijing, they must be thinking, hey, this was a good time. We've been winning. We're still winning. US, Trump, nothing to worry about. South China Sea, Southeast Asia is looking for Trump to, like, reinforce. We're looking for reinforcement. If you ask the Filipinos, Duterte, Prime Minister Phuc, you know, generally in ASEAN, we're looking for reinforcement. What does he want to do? I can help you mediate. He wants to be a mediator for the South China Sea. Mediation is not what's needed. Reinforcement, support her. offsetter, right? But that's what he's done. So in Beijing, they must be very, very pleased. So this consolidates China's winning ways in the region that has gone on since the Obama years. And they must be pretty delighted. I think in Beijing, things are under control. Now, what is China's way going to mean for us? So China, as you know, and other speakers have mentioned about, you know, the Belt Road, BRI, AIB, NDB. They have game. They've got a game plan. They've got a playbook. Even in Zimbabwe, they got a little seizure of power. They even went to see China first. China's in Africa. China's all over here. So what does China want to do? This is the ultimate, penultimate question, right? So I've been saying to my students now, it's a kind of a Chinese manifest destiny. You know, the US has a manifest destiny. President Monroe says, you know, Western Hemisphere is kind of like ours, you know, the westward expansion in the US. We're destined to be a great continental superpower. Don't worry about it. That's our destiny. So for China, I think it's just, you know, reintroducing a past that they used to be the top dog in the region, the Eurasian landmass, all the way to Africa, not the whole world. But if you look at Xi Jinping's language and his new strategy about, you know, the thing, he has a strategy called a new great power relationships, right? New types of great power relationships. What he means is that, and he did mention it explicitly, Asia Pacific, which Trump called Indo-Pacific sometimes, has enough space for the both of them. Don't worry, right? So it could be US and China, but what Xi Jinping also meant, you can be with me, we can co-share, right? But I'm not number two. I'm never number two. I don't have to be number one. We can be co-number one, but I'm not number two. I think this is the new type of major power relationship that I've been seeing. When I first saw that, I thought, what are they talking about? I see it's Chinese. I asked them. It's becoming clearer and clearer. This is what he means. It's China's way. It's also going to be China's choice now. If they go too far, you know, the region now has no other choice. They have to just go along. But I'll come to this at the end. But you know, the region eventually will push back in some way if China goes too far. So in fact, now China has a lot of latitude to do as it pleases, to shape the regional order as it sees fit. But if it goes too far, it's actually counterproductive. My final point. So what does this mean for East Asia? ASEAN, Thailand, and the rest, the Trump trip. He talked about the Indo-Pacific in the APEC speech 4 times, right? So first, he probably doesn't even know most of the places in this region. I mean, Mekong River, he probably has no idea where that is. However, I think in conjunction with his people, the Indo-Pacific is going to be his outlook for the region. And you know, what is Indo-Pacific? Indo-Pacific is really everything except Europe. Not Africa, but you know, not Africa anyway. So it's just not Europe. So I think now that's going to be wedded in his mind about the Indo-Pacific. What this means is that Trump, and I'm working on this, it's not conclusive to my mind, but it's some preliminary observations. He may just be, we actually may be behind the curve. He's actually the curve. You know, we hate to think it that way. He's what? He's actually the curve. He's becoming the curve. We actually are behind the curve. Could be. Be careful. He may actually be the first full-blooded, post-Cold War US president that we've seen. You know, the Cold War lasted a long time. The Cold War, after World War II, they set up an international system, the Bretton Woods system, you know, all this IMF, World Bank, IBRD, World Bank, WTO, rules-based liberal international order. The rules-based liberal international order. Cold War, towards the end of it, you know, Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Clinton, you know, another Bush, they all upheld the liberal international order. Yeah. Trump does not. He doesn't quite reject it, but it's just not his first priority to uphold it. So what does this mean? Well, it's not very good for the world, but even his tweets, I look at the tweets, we like, he sets the agenda for everybody. So he goes to bed, he does a few tweets. In the morning, before he wakes up, the stock markets, the world, they are in gyration, right? Shaking to his tune already. And he does more tweets. So in a way, maybe, he's the kind of guy that it was bound to come along for the US in their own way. And it's a time for the US, it's going to turn inward. And you can see this in the phases of US diplomatic foreign policy history. And maybe it was bound to happen. So what that means for us, gotta take care of ourselves in a number of ways. First, if you want to be a democracy, don't expect the US to help you. They're not going to be out there dancing and crying for democratic values and human rights in elections, not Trump. So, you better look inward, you better look regionally. For trade, for finance, all kinds of ways. More regional reliance and self-reliance. And I think the middle powers, this is my final point, the middle powers, Australia, Japan, I think Japan is in a bad spot. Japan must be very flustered. Japan was looking for something else, and Japan has all the makings of a great power. It just doesn't have a military, right? So it doesn't have the game to match China. And with the US, it can, but not enough for Japan. But maybe with India, Japan, Australia, ASEAN, maybe that's a way to have a hand in the reshaping of regional order. Otherwise, it will be China, China.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. And I will throw the floor open to questions now. If you want to ask a question, please identify yourselves and keep the question brief and to the point if you can. Patrick, nice to see you here.
Hello.
Yep, you're
Can you
on.
hear me?
You're on.
Quick clarification before my question, Ajahn Gobsak. At the beginning, you said, I couldn't tell if you were joking or not. Rex Tillerson, okay. Rex Tillerson put specific pressure on Thai diplomats to close the North Korean restaurants on Sukhumvit. That's just teasing, right?
Teasing.
Okay, okay.
Or it could have happened, I don't know.
Okay, would be interesting if true. My question is, U.S. foreign policy has been all about pushing for rule of law and human rights. And I'm interested to hear what diplomats, or what in the halls of power in Southeast Asia, how do people really feel about this? Do they think America is hypocritical and they're sort of a nag? Or has it actually inspired, is it actually prove inspirational?
Okay, and that could be for any of the three of you, I think, Asia's view of the way the US has pursued human rights.
Okay, I have a jab at that, Jonathan. Yes, I think that's on and off. It blows hot and cold. Sometimes it feels that they are too abrasive, too pushy, hypocritical in pushing for certain values that perhaps were not the values of the day in some of the Asian countries. I think after the coup d'etat here in Thailand, they felt that the US was not sympathetic enough, that China was more sympathetic, saying that, okay, you guys do whatever you want to do in your own country, we won't judge, we won't point fingers. And that led to this movement towards China, appreciation of China. But that could have been offset very quickly by a good visit to the White House, which Trump administration did. But that is the personal relationship, the power relationship, the feeling that the US felt perhaps that they had to draw in Thailand. I've always said that to the people who were concerned that we would not be invited to the Washington, to the White House, others are being invited and all that. I said, the road to Washington goes through Beijing. We would not be a factor if we were not seen as a player in this great power rivalry. If we were far away from China, we were in the middle of the Indian Ocean on an island, that you can do whatever you want. We would be almost more than nothing. But with that possibility of having some closer relationship with Beijing, going to Beijing. Perhaps that was the best way to get an invitation to Washington, rather than saying, oh, there'll be an election, there'll be human rights, we won't bash anybody anymore, people can demonstrate on the streets. That may not have appealed to Trump to say that, okay, come, but okay, China, okay, trade, yes, you are one of the 12 countries that we have a big trade deficit with. So I think there you go, the value of human rights and how it's perceived changes from country to country, of course. But I think overall, as I started, pity Ajahn Titinan was not here because he can be the multiplier for that thought. I quoted a lot of people. I quoted Obama and all that. I quoted this thing that we all studied in school, I think, a country conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights. That element, I think, perhaps more and more will be felt as the differences, the distinctions are drawn between the great powers. Where is that element? Is it just trade now? Is it investment, bottom line, pocketbook? If that is the platform, if that is the arena of competition, I think there's only one winner, and that's a pity. That's a pity. And if every country has dreams, but the big dream of some country may become a nightmare for others. These aspirations of others. So I think, yes, for me personally, for a lot of people, I think now, who stands up for human rights, dignity, individuals, they may be passé. And if the concern of Ajahn Titinan is correct, that President Trump now represents the curve. Wow, this, it's very, it's shocking for at least for me, because we recall the Obama phrase, the moral curve of the universe tends towards justice. If that curve now tends towards the bottom line, it's very scary. It's very scary. We in a new world, if this is the new era that President Trump represents on behalf of America, and all the determinants of the constraints of an American power, Pax Americana, has devolved into this, as Ajahn Titinan said, we are all, in Thai would be tu kai tu man, everybody for himself then.
Steve, I was going to just ask you, there was that extraordinary moment on the Trump visit where President Trump was ambushed by Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen and took a selfie with him, clearly not knowing who he was. And Hun Sen, of course, has not just suspended democratic rule, but also attacked America. But there was some embarrassment among his officials, I think, about that. And there was afterwards an attempt by former US head of mission Patrick Murphy. Did you get a sense, Steve, that human rights wasn't completely absent, or democracy wasn't completely absent from the agenda?
Yes, I think so. I think it is definitely being de-emphasized, and we've seen that in previous administrations, especially during the Cold War, when there was a pragmatic approach and overlooking a lot of things, and I think we're definitely in that era again. Now, just a few minutes ago, we have some breaking news. Just when you think that there has been a total disregard for emphasizing these sort of things, we just had Secretary of State Tillerson issue a message about the Rohingya, and I'll read it. It says, quote, "After a careful and thorough analysis of available facts, it is clear that the situation in northern Rakhine State constitutes ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya." I don't think any of us were expecting such an unequivocal statement coming from a top official of the U.S. government on that situation. So there are little slivers, I think, where these things are not totally off the table, and it's not totally a mercantilist relationship. As you pointed out, the situation with the thumbs up with Hun Sen is Trump being Trump, and of course, as has been mentioned, the soft language that was used in regards to Duterte in the Philippines, and they've definitely backed off of that in this administration compared to the approach of the Obama administration. So a much more pragmatic approach. But I guess, you know, I mean, Jonathan, you're the real expert here. You know, when it comes to Myanmar, to Burma, you know, there's not much geopolitical risk or trade risk to the United States by heavily criticizing, you know, the Burmese government on the Rohingya. And obviously they've been under tremendous pressure, not only from members of Congress who have been in Naypyidaw, but I think also from other countries in South Asia in regards to this.
Thanks very much. Can we have the next question, please, Michael?
Sorry, Steve, you've just thrown me because I was going to throw you, specifically you, a question about North Korea, which will keep me up at night tonight, whichever way you answer it. Can you just elaborate as to what this kind of, not deep state, but off-the-record agreement they seem to have come to is about North Korea? And then I'll put the other question after you've answered
An
that.
agreement with who, which?
No, this is, Steve mentioned that there seemed to have been some kind of informal agreement and that the administration felt that they'd got concessions from the Chinese. And I'm just wondering if you could say anything more about that, Steve.
That's back to you again, Steve. Were there any...
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that the administration has made it very clear, both from its public statements and from comments on background and officials speaking off the record, that they have drawn a line in the sand. And I would say, however, I think there is a bit of naivete that they do, at the highest level, still believe that the Chinese are going to be able to handle this situation for them, and that there can be hopefully some sort of replacement of Kim Jong-un with a Chinese-installed North Korean military government, and there can be a gradual transition to a reintegration, reunification of North and South Korea, a la, you know, what the Germans did. And I would just point out that from being on the trip and dealing with the officials in the White House every day, that while we have three very experienced generals who are, I don't think, looking to, you know, they're not warmongers at the very top of this administration, Mattis, McMaster, and Kelly, that they are not military officials who had much experience with Korea on their way up. And this administration, which does not have an ambassador in place in Seoul, does seem very weak as far as its depth of knowledge about Korea. And of course, the State Department has been almost totally disenfranchised from the discussions. And we have the president's daily intelligence briefing being delivered by the CIA director, who some believe is trying to spin things in a way that the president wants to hear. So I've been dealing with the North Korean issue for nearly 40 years now, and I would agree with every single Korea expert I've been talking to that we're more alarmed than at any time in the past 40 years about the situation on the peninsula. And while I, you know, don't think that, you know, war is necessarily going to break out at any moment, that things are much, much worse than they have been in decades, and the risk is now very, very high that there's going to be some sort of military exchange that could easily get out of control.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry, Mike, was that your...
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That'll ruin tonight's sleep for me very well.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks. My other question...
Have another beer.
Thanks, yeah. Are you paying? My other question
Put it
is
on Jonathan's tab.
Oh, right, I shall. The other question was on the issue of security, that the stepping back of the Americans from human rights and respect for the rule of law. Will this complicate issues like the Rohingya? I'm also thinking Patani in the south, And if we're all looking after our own interests, as President Duterte seems to do very well, how would that affect the situation in Mindanao? I mean, could that be a precedent for what happens in Thailand and indeed elsewhere in the world?
So,
well, like I said, I'm actually very surprised by this message we just had from Secretary Tillerson about ethnic cleansing in the Rohingya. I did not see that coming, and it'll be very much welcomed. And maybe we'll have to have people reevaluate where this administration stands on human rights. But I think, as we've seen with the situation in the Philippines, that they've given Duterte essentially a carte blanche. There may have been some discussions behind the scenes when they were in Manila expressing some concern. But remember, this is an administration that's looking at everything through either the prism of trade relations or of the battle against terrorism. And I think any sort of country that's carrying out human rights violations in the name of going after Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, whatever, that they're generally going to get much more of a pass compared to some of the past recent U.S. administrations. And it would have to be something truly egregious to get criticism, as is the case with the Rohingya in Myanmar.
Thanks, Steve. Titinane.
You know, the U.S. system is not monolithic. So I think we can see where the White House stands. And there is a struggle within the U.S. government, between the White House, State Department, the Pentagon and State Department especially. The Pentagon has been given a massive, massive budget boost. The State Department has massive budget cut. They haven't filled out important positions in Seoul in many places. I mean, Patrick Murphy is still kind of like the lead guy, but they don't have an assistant secretary for East Asia Pacific. So I think that we have to differentiate. So I think for Trump, you know, it's the administration, the White House, the NSC. So in the NSC in the White House, the main guy there is Matt Pottinger. They have a certain standard we can see. You can see that in the inauguration speech, it's not black and white, it's a matter of degree. It's not like human rights, no human rights. There's some, it depends where you look, depends where it is. Inauguration speech, you know, Trump mentioned that he's not gonna, he read that they don't seek to impose their way of life on anybody else. And that was repeated in Riyadh. So I think the Trump proclivity is pretty clear, inclination very clear, the White House. Now, the US system is immense. It's got the Congress. I think this Tillerson comment that Steve mentioned probably probably came from the Hill. You know, and they have congressional staff, they got a lot of lobby groups and so on. I think the key for them is this term ethnic cleansing. So we have to appreciate that. And that means for us, human rights around here, they'll have some mention, some no mention. In the Deep South, I think when you see, put it this way, when you see mention of human rights, most likely not coming from the White House, or not initiated from the White House, probably initiated from elsewhere.
Could we have the next question, please? Identify yourself too, please, you can.
I'm Lucas Gutierrez.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chutikul, how do you believe that China's foreign policy will change as Xi Jinping strengthens his hold over the Communist Party of China? Will it change at all? Or can we see a significant change in the foreign policy aims of China as his reign continues?
Right, okay, thank you. And you're from where, sorry? So
sorry?
Organization, you're from China?
Shrewsbury International School.
One of our younger attendees from Shrewsbury International School.
Shrewsbury, oh, great, okay. Great. So you are the future. So we hope the Chinese dream is something that we can all relate to. Encouraging signs that a lot of the things that Xi Jinping says could have been said quite truly, whether at the WEF, at the APEC, by an American president. But coming from the president of China, it lacks that certain kind of credibility still, I think, that sort of makes people feel that, that is uplifting. So I think that is what we miss. Not actually the policies on the ground, but at least that kind of lip service that when you listen and say, okay, this, this is from that country we learned about in school that we thought was that shining city on the hill, that kind of imagery, I think perhaps is what is missing at this time. I think Steve mentioned that, okay, Tillerson is saying something about ethnic cleansing in Myanmar now. That sort of offsets a little bit for us the optics of him when meeting Aung San Suu Kyi, talking about Rohingya, smiling, joking on television with Aung San Suu Kyi, when supposedly he was going to go there and press her to do the right thing. So certainly, in the next breath, he said the State Department was disenfranchised. So I don't think what the kind of weight that Tillerson's statement makes, and as Ajahn Thitinan said, a lot of pressure from Congress, they're going to have sanctions and all that, really reassures us that much. Possibly if Pompeo, the CIA guy, takes over from State Department and says that, oh, maybe, it has that kind of weight as well. But as you were asking, yes, as Ajahn Thitinan says, the shadow of China is cast even broader. I think as a result of this trip, as we sit down over the next few weeks, I think serious policymakers would have to consider that South China Sea is a Chinese lake, and hopefully they would not be as strict in terms of the sovereignty, territorial boundary question, more flexible, certain islands, forward defense, that kind of thing, but having freedom of navigation and oversight in their so-called sphere of influence. So I think that is the message of Xi Jinping being there with firm hand, Communist Party, next 5 years, and possibly the possibility of longer. So continuity, their stability, their growth, prosperity, is that the lure of the future?
We have the next question. Oh, you do have a follow-up?
May I ask a second question?
You can, yes. Okay, let's keep it quick.
So, Mr. Herman, having seen how America and China and the other countries in Southeast Asia and Asia in general interact with each other, how do you think international politics will continue in Asia after this major realignment? Will the United States continue as the main leader after, let us say, once again, a more moderate leader is once again elected to the presidency? Or will there be a permanent change in America's prestige and position in Asia?
That's Tuesday.
I think that's an excellent question, and it's probably the most important question for Asia as a whole. And I don't have any confidence in a prediction about that. I think even if we had an Obama third term, so to speak, or Hillary Clinton had been elected president, that the United States would still be confronting serious challenges vis-a-vis the rise of China. And maybe what's happening is with the Trump administration's approach, as was pointed out, maybe he's ahead of the curve, is that this is being accelerated. But I think, look, it was inevitable in the 21st century that America would not consider to have the sort of position that it had over the past decades in view of a rising China, just as the sort of dominance that the United States had immediately after World War II in the world gradually also decreased as well. But we still have to keep in mind that the United States has a very robust military presence in the region, the world's largest blue water navy. The Chinese are going to take many, many decades to be able to catch up if they ever are. And this administration using that phrase Indo-Pacific This is not an accident. This is something that they consider and that President Trump has been convinced of to emphasize over and over again. And what they're looking at, ideally, is an alignment in the face of a rising China that brings together Japan, Australia, India, and hopefully can get the South Koreans and the Japanese to share intelligence with each other, and any other country that is concerned about the rise of China to be able to jump in, even if you don't want to call it a military alliance, but that's essentially what it is. Japan and South Korea have formal military alliances with the United States. And so I think when it comes to countries such as Thailand, that Thailand is one of the countries in the region that, looking at what's happened in neighboring countries such as Laos, for example, and other parts of the world where there is really increasing Chinese domination of geopolitics and the economy, there's a stark choice. And so maybe if you just have a one-on-one relationship with the United States, it's not necessarily going to be strong enough. But if everybody is sort of linked together in the region as a fence against China, perhaps that fence can hold.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. We can have the next question, please. Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Mike Ramanash. I'm a freelance tech and business reporter. So I just want to ask, kind of change subject to more of the business and economic side. So I have a question for Steve Herman. So from your observation during your Asia trip, what the local business think of Trump's visit? What do you think that they would, get any benefited from his visit? And my second question is, as we always know that, Trump and, his party now, trying to have a stricter immigration policies, and what the entrepreneurs or the business people in the countries that Trump visited, from your observation, think of that. And I don't know if you have time to spend time talking to them, and do you think would that could hurt foreign investment, especially from Asia startups?
Okay, yeah, great questions. On the first question though, Mike, what did you mean by businesses?
Well, I'm thinking about, the thing is, I can give you examples. I mean, we can agree that the Trump visit this time is heavily on trades. It's
right.
It's less on human rights, less on politics, but really heavy on trades and economy. So my question is, you see Boeing, they're doing deals with Beijing, purchasing more Boeing aircraft whatsoever. But we don't. But what the local business think? Like, do you think the companies, these are not American companies. It's not Boeing or Microsoft or the big company.
Right.
What do they get from his visit?
Yeah, I think very little because the president touted out this number. Oh, we signed $300 billion worth of trade deals on this trip. Maybe it's really going to amount to $1 trillion. He loves to throw out numbers. And I was in the room in Hanoi when everybody was coming up and signing those documents, and they really were non-binding memoranda of understanding. And we saw the same thing. I was in the room in Riyadh when this happened, where we had 23 people come up and sign deals. We never got details about it. They are just numbers that Trump can throw out there to his base to try to impress upon them that he's doing something about the trade deficit. And that is the bottom line for him, is to be able to throw these numbers out, whether or not there's actually any substance to them, to keep his campaign promises that he's doing something about the huge trade deficit. And believe me, in the next few months, you are going to see concrete action taken against China by the U.S. TR. On the second issue, you have to remember that another one of his core campaign values was immigration, cracking down on immigrants. The president may never get his real physical wall with Mexico, but there is a virtual wall that has gone up, and this is affecting also immigration, legal and illegal in the United States, makes it much harder to get visas to work in this country. And I know a lot of people in the tech trade are complaining about this. And if I was setting up a company right now, I'd probably move out of the United States and set it up in Canada if I wanted to have a North American base, just because the whole immigration, the visa issues are so much easier. And so what they're doing now, there's been orders to the Department of Homeland Security to basically maximize enforcement, follow the letter of the law. The word has gone out to the officers in the U.S. embassies around the world to really scrutinize these visas. When in doubt, just turn them down. And there are a lot of people in this country who think that this is a very bad approach on trade. But as was pointed out by the panelists, this administration is rejecting multilateral treaties. Whatever you thought of the TPP or NAFTA or the Korea-U.S. deal, Trump has a real bee in his bonnet about these things. And if they were done by the Obama administration, he wants to scrap them. And he wants to do one-on-one trade deals. And maybe some of these deals, some countries will get good deals out of it. But if you're a globalist, if you're a free trader, you know, these are very dark times when it comes to trade with the United States, I think.
I'd like just to bring in the panel here. Ajahn Prapat, it's almost axiomatic that even if US power declines, the US market is essential for the economies of this region. How much risk do you think there is of damage to the economies in this region by a Donald Trump approach to trade, which is going to focus so heavily on reducing the American trade deficit? I mean, are there economies in this region, in the ASEAN region, that look like they will seriously suffer, or do people think this will just blow over?
As I mentioned earlier, that you know, it depends on whether he could be able to implement his policy or not. But if he could be able to implement his policy, the speech, Danang speech, that he would like to push for bilateral trade negotiation with Asian trading partners, that's going to be a big headache for Asian countries that I mentioned. You know, that I already mentioned that we don't have good choices. You know. So I think that it's going to be a very uncertain period, you know, for regional economic order in the future. You know. You see that right now we have a overlapping kind of a movement, particularly from three actors, you know, in the regional, the so-called regional economic architecture. One is from ASEAN. You know, ASEAN is pushing for the ASEC, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the ASEAN +6 FTA, and the ASEAN Pacific FTA. If we could be able to conclude the ASEC is going to be the largest FTA in the world, and it will make ASEAN as the core of the regional economic architecture. So that's going to be one scenario, and that will benefit ASEAN and also Thailand, you know, if ASEAN could be able to conclude. Okay, then the second scenario going to be Trump, the U.S. as a core of the regional economic architecture. During Obama period, TPP supposed to be the flagship, you know, to make the U.S. to be the core of the regional economic architecture. But then Trump, you know, just withdrew the U.S. from the TPP. Now he is focusing on bilateral negotiation. We have to wait and see whether these bilateral kind of hub and the new so-called trading hub and spoke kind of strategy going to be realized or not. And this is going to be the second scenario, and it's going to be a difficult scenario for Thailand, you know, for Asian countries. The third one going to be China as the core of the regional economic architecture. China also is trying very hard to come up with its own architecture, its own organization, its own regional mechanism. So we have three scenarios. We don't know what would be the outcome.
Thanks. Last question, please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Klaus Thompson. I'm an Asia correspondent from a Danish newspaper called Politiken. I just joined today, so I'm a new member, so hello everybody.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I just have two very brief questions because, Steve, when I followed what Trump said about North Korea on his trip, I kind of got the feeling that he actually didn't have a strategy about what to do. You said before that he does have a limit somehow. Can you clarify a little bit? What do you think? Does he have a strategy? Does he know what to do, apart from just using very hard rhetoric about how stupid Kim Jong-un is? Do you have any idea about what the US will do in terms of military pressure, but also following the diplomatic path? There are rumors about that there are negotiations going on. Is that also your impression?
Is this military pressure on North Korea?
Yeah, exactly, but also diplomatic diplomatic contacts. What is your idea? And then a very brief question, it could be to Mr. Tinan, I cannot pronounce your name correctly, to the right.
That's right, you're new in Thailand, you're forgiven for a month.
Yeah.
And you've got to pronounce it correctly after that.
Yeah. I can't see it from here, I'm sorry. You always talk about America first. In Europe, there's some fear about that actually strong allies of America like Thailand and so on in this region can actually be pushed more into the arms of China, even though they have some kind of cooperation with the US. How much do you think that actually China and other countries like Malaysia and so on will be pushed into the arms of China? We also see there's a train going on, train deal with China now and Thailand and so on.
Okay, let's Steve bring you in on, is there a clear strategy and is there a military pressure option for the United States and Korea, and then we can go to the other one.
Yes, absolutely. The priority is on applying all types of pressure and threatening North Korea with military action if it continues with the provocations. There have been overtures to see if the North Koreans would be interested in diplomatic engagement. Of course, there's always these track 1.5, track 2 encounters going on, but those have really not led to anything fruitful. And the starting point for this administration is for at least some sort of freeze by North Korea in its development. And I would say 95% of the experts I've spoken with about North Korea do not believe that, regardless of what sort of pressure comes from China or military threats, that is going to happen, because it would totally undermine the Kim Jong-un regime in the eyes of his own leadership. And there's a lot of hardliners in the leadership, military leadership in Pyongyang. So just as we talk about the United States not being monolithic on all these issues, I can tell you that in North Korea there are different pressure groups with Kim Jong-un as the head, but he is very influenced by these hardliners, and we have seen these hardliners time and again sabotage anything that anybody so-called more pragmatists in North Korea try to do coming from the foreign ministry. And I predict that is what will happen again, and that's why I'm not the only one concerned that we're heading into some very dangerous times when it comes to North Korea and the United States. And there seems to be a high degree of faith here that, oh, let's just let the Chinese sort this out. But at the same time, this administration is about to bash the Chinese very heavily on trade, and we'll see how Xi Jinping reacts to that. I think I am. I'm not sure if I missed a part of the question.
That's
there.
okay. I'm going to get to the panelists now on the question of it being thrown into the arms of China. I suppose one point about this region is, certainly in the last few decades, is the ability to balance China against the United States has been almost ideal. If Trump is withdrawing, is that going to unbalance things? Will countries have no choice but to accept the hegemony of China? Any one of the three of you can start on that one.
Well, I'll jump in there first also, because Ajahn Thitinan would have much more sensible things to say to wrap up. But for some countries, we can see that the decision has been made. Cambodia is gone. So they say, we close the opposition party, ban them, because even if the State Department were to say something, issue a press release on it, we don't care. America can take all its aid back if it wants to cut aid. So there, the choice has been made. Laos perhaps also, which is worrying because it means that the breakup of ASEAN, again going back whether Singapore can hold everything together, and in 2019 whether Thailand as chairman would have the means and everything to hold ASEAN together as well, because some ASEAN countries have made that choice already. Then I go back to the point that whether anything could have been done differently, it was inevitable, US wasn't going to be there forever, 21st century and all that. But taking a shorter time span, I think policies still matter, decisions still matter, personalities still matter. One concrete example is that there was a strategy, a policy in place to try to balance off the influence of China. That was the TPP. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't be all and end all of everything. It didn't include every country, but there was that element. China was not in it. It was a TPP, free trade area, gold standard, as Obama said, of trade deals. But suddenly, the rug was pulled. So again, it could have been different. I think that's the point. Whether inevitably 50, 100 years, the rise of China cannot be countered or is inevitable. But in the immediate short term, the policies that have been taken over the past year at least perhaps has accelerated that trend and has forced countries in the region to make a decision. And one final thought, Jonathan, is that we've mentioned on and off a little bit, Riyadh, Middle East, the last trip of President Trump. Whether by design or not, or whether by misperception, the analysis that of the regional countries 2 or 3 weeks or even 2 or 3 months after the visit, whether Qatar was part of that wrong assessment or not, wrong signals given the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, what is he doing, Lebanon and all that. Because there was a big trip there, reassessment being made, analysis being made by the various countries in the region. Hopefully, that after this whirlwind visit, and caught attention, and I would agree with President Trump. He said it was an epic trip. When countries sit down and analyze, I hope they don't draw wrong conclusions here and there, whether India now is going to rise up and stand up and confront, or South Korea get the wrong message, or China or Japan and rearm and all that. So those are the fall off, maybe the unintended consequences when various countries try to interpret something that was not made clear in policy, a slogan perhaps. Even that simple phrase, Indo-Pacific, seems still a slogan searching for substance. And people will interpret that on their own, draw consequences, and perhaps act accordingly in the wrong direction.
Thank you.
May I,
yes,
may
please.
I add to that? Okay, it's very, I think it's a very interesting question. Maybe it's going to be a biggest question in the 21st century in Asia. How we can come up with a equilibrium, kind of a balanced system or a stable system. I think I come up, my quick thought is that I come up with 4 scenarios. The first one going to be, scenario number 1 going to be US hegemony, which I think in the past, yes, of course, is a unipolar world. The US is a hegemon in the region. But I think this scenario is kind of gradually losing its reality, its possibility for long term. So this will lead to the second scenario, that is Chinese hegemony. This is possible. This is possible if the US is withdraw from the region, and and China is coming up very strong. China is #1, and China will become a new hegemon in the region. This is one possibility, one scenario. But the problem for this scenario is that I think many countries in the region will think that this is not acceptable for China to be a new regional hegemon. There will be a counterbalance, there will be a balancing against China. So this will lead to the third scenario, that's going to be a balance of power, a balancing, it's going to be a combination of balancing strategies. Maybe a US minus, maybe a Japan plus, India plus, Australia plus, ASEAN. It's going to be some kind of a new combination.
Like the concert of Europe in the 19th century, balancing powers. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, I think in the end it's going to be not a provocative or a classic balancing. It's going to be a soft balancing, non-provocative balancing strategy against China. That's going to be a third scenario. The fourth one going to be maybe China will be, of course, a new leader, but not hegemony. Maybe in between, something like that. Okay.
Thank you very much. Right, we've got no other comments. You want to, Ajahn, you got a final comment to make on that?
Well, it doesn't have to be final, but there was a question about China.
Yeah.
Well, China is the default resident giant default superpower support for all countries, whether democratic, dictatorship, authoritarian, you name it, across continents. You can always go to China. They have open arms. All regimes, doesn't matter. Now, I think that there are structural transformation underway in the global system, not just in Asia, China. If you look at the global unraveling of the post-Second World War liberal international order, it's giving rise to all kinds of dynamics. I mean, China is just one, this theater is one, this right-wing populism in many places, including in Europe, is another manifestation. So there are larger forces even at work. For your question about China and Asia, certainly there's a lot of literature about hedging, bandwagoning. I believe that no country in Southeast Asia and beyond would want to be completely dependent on China, to be completely in China's orbit. Cambodia has made a choice. I think Cambodia has, you would think that this is irreversible now. They've cast their future now, dissolving the opposition party, basically chasing out the U.S. and castigating, the U.S. But it's not the end of it. It's not a foregone conclusion. It's not terminal. It's not permanent. It still can change. 10 years ago, Hun Sen cast his lot with Thaksin, right? And then after a while, Thaksin not going to win, so he changed. Now he casts his lot with the military. So even Hun Sen can change. So I think that we're talking about the next year, 2 years. But if you take a long view, 5 years, 10 years, I still think that we could still salvage some of the rules-based order in East Asia, but this requires some new leadership from Japan, a more assertive Japan, Australia, South Korea, and ASEAN. ASEAN has been divided, so I think for ASEAN this is a reckoning now. I think that ASEAN, to be effective, they have to have new modality. Can't be the same consensus, the ASEAN way, and so on. They have to have some majority voting. Some countries can do some things other countries don't have to do, and so on. And in that way, we can have a kind of a shared future in East Asia. This is a consequential question about China, because I see in all these regimes, key countries, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Philippines, and so on, there's a resurgence of authoritarianism, right? So China is a big guy here. He's a big guy, he's a big supporter. But this could change, but it requires domestic wherewithal. Not going to come from outside now. So for countries like Cambodia, it has to be organic, bottom up. Countries like Thailand, it has to be organic, bottom up. If you want to have a democracy or some kind of a shared power that you can determine your own future collectively, you got to get yourself it can still happen. So China has to watch out, you know. I mean, yeah, it has its way now. It will have its way for the next 2, 3, 4, even 5 years. But beyond that, could boomerang as well.
Thanks very much indeed. And I know we're a somewhat diminished audience now, but I'd like to give a very warm round of applause to our panelists, and particularly to Steve Herman for getting up so early for us. It's very early in Washington. Thanks a lot.